The banished child, the desert was wide, endless, and cruel. Red sand stretched as far as the little alien girl could see. The sky above was dark, filled with heavy clouds that hid the stars. Cold winds cut across her skin like knives. She pulled her small arms close to her chest, trying to stay warm, but her thin clothes gave no comfort. Her name was Lyra. She was only 8 cycles old, still very young by the measure of her people, but tonight she walked alone. Her tribe had banished her. It had happened only a day after her mother's death. Her mother had been her only protector, the only one who had cared for her. When sickness took her away, the elders gathered. Their eyes were cold, their words sharper than any blade. "This child is cursed," one elder had said. "She brings bad luck," whispered another. "Her mother died because of her." A third voice spat. Lyra had begged, "Please don't send me away. I have no one. I will work. I will serve." But no one listened. They turned their backs on her. And so, with nothing but a small bag of dried roots and water, they pushed her out of the gates of the settlement. She looked back one last time, hoping someone, anyone, would call her name. But the gates closed and silence swallowed her. Now she stumbled through the desert, her legs weak, her stomach empty. The roots were gone, the water almost finished. Her throat burned, her lips cracked. Every step felt heavier than the last. The night was alive with strange sounds. Creatures moved in the shadows. Their glowing eyes followed her, waiting for her to fall. She had always heard stories of what lived in the desert. Hunters with sharp teeth, monsters that dragged the weak into their dens. Alone, she had no defense. Her small body shook with fear, but she forced herself to keep walking. Her mother had once told her, "As long as you keep moving, hope will follow." She repeated those words again and again in her mind. They were the only thing keeping her alive, but soon her legs gave out. She fell to her knees. The sand was cold beneath her skin. She tried to rise, but her body refused. Tears filled her eyes, but even those felt dry. "I don't want to die," she whispered into the empty night. "Mother, please." "I don't want to die." As if answering her, a growl echoed behind her. Low, deep, and hungry, Lyra froze. Slowly, she turned her head. From the darkness, 3 shadowed beasts crept forward. Their bodies were lean, their claws long, their teeth shining in the moonlight. Their eyes glowed yellow, fixed on her. She could hear the soft crunch of sand beneath their paws as they moved closer, circling her. Her heart raced. Her hands shook. She searched for a stone, a stick, anything, but there was nothing. The first beast growled louder, showing its fangs. Lyra closed her eyes. This was it. Alone, weak, and forgotten, she would end here, just as her people had expected. But then, something changed. A sound cut through the night. Not the growl of a beast, but a sharp crack like fire-breaking stone. The beasts stopped, their ears rising, their eyes shifting toward the darkness behind Lyra. Another sound followed, loud and strange, like thunder in the desert. The beasts snarled, uneasy. One stepped forward, but then flinched back as a bright light flashed. Lyra's eyes widened. She turned her head, and for the first time in her life she saw him. A figure stood tall against the night, wrapped in heavy clothing, a burning torch in one hand and a strange object in the other. His face was partly hidden, but his eyes burned with fierce determination. He shouted something in a language she did not know, but the beasts seemed to understand. They hissed, backing away slowly. The human took a step forward, swinging the torch. Fire danced in the air, and the beasts growled one last time before fading into the shadows. Silence returned. Only the crackle of fire remained. Lyra stared at him, her small body trembling. She had heard stories of humans. Her people said they were dangerous, violent, and selfish. They were not to be trusted. And yet here one was, saving her. The man lowered his torch slightly and looked at her. His eyes were not cruel like the elders. They were sharp. But there was something else hidden inside them, something she had not seen since her mother's death. It was kindness. He knelt down slowly, careful not to frighten her, and held out a small flask. Water. Lyra hesitated. Her people's warning screamed in her mind. Humans cannot be trusted. They only bring ruin. But her dry lips and burning throat begged for relief. Her hands shook as she reached forward. The human gave the flask to her without a word. The water was cool, sweeter than anything she had ever tasted. She drank until her chest hurt. When she looked back up, he was still there, watching, silent, waiting. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt something she thought was gone forever. Hope. And yet fear lingered in her heart. Who was this man? Why was he here in the desert? And most of all, what would he want in return? The night was not over, and her journey had only just begun. The stranger in the dark. The torchlight flickered against the desert stones, painting shadows across the ground. The little alien girl, Lyra, sat frozen where she had fallen. Her wide eyes followed the tall figure who had saved her from the beasts. The man moved slowly, as if he knew sudden actions would frighten her. He lowered the torch and placed it in the sand so its glow would stay steady. Then he crouched down closer to her height. His face came into the light. His skin was pale compared to her people, his hair short and dark. Lines of dust streaked his cheeks, showing he had been traveling for a long time. He said something in his strange human tongue. The words were soft, not sharp like the elders of her tribe. She did not understand them, but the tone was gentle, almost like her mother's voice used to be. Lyra's heart pounded. Her people had warned her many times. Never trust a human. They lie, they steal, they kill. But this one had chased away the monsters. This one had offered her water. She tightened her arms around her knees, torn between fear and need. The man noticed her shaking. Slowly he pulled something from his pack. It was round and small, glowing faintly blue. He pressed the sides, and with a click the object opened like a shell. Inside was food. Soft, warm bread and dried fruit. Lyra's eyes widened. Her stomach screamed with hunger, but she did not move. The man placed the food carefully on the ground between them, then leaned back, showing he would not force her. For a long moment, silence filled the desert. Only the crackle of the torch and the distant howl of a creature broke it. Finally, Lyra reached out with trembling fingers. She grabbed a piece of bread and pulled it close to her chest, sniffing it like a small animal testing for danger. When she took a bite, her eyes watered. It was soft, salty, and real. She ate quickly, as if afraid it would be taken away. The man watched without speaking. He only gave a small nod, then sat cross-legged on the sand. He pulled a blanket from his pack and placed it near the fire. The night grew colder. The wind howled like a ghost across the dunes. Lyra's thin clothes could not stop the chill, and her teeth began to chatter. The man noticed. He did not touch her, but he pushed the blanket closer until it brushed her side. She flinched at first, but then pulled it around her shoulders. Warmth spread through her, and for the first time since her mother's death, she did not feel completely alone. The man spoke again. His words were still strange, but his voice carried patience. Then slowly he pointed to himself. "Kyle," he said. Lyra blinked. She understood it was his name. She hesitated, then whispered, "Lyra." Her voice was hoarse, but Kale gave a small smile. He pointed at her, repeated softly, "Lyra." The sound of her name from a stranger's mouth startled her, but there was no cruelty in his tone. Only recognition. They sat together by the fire, two exiles from different worlds listening to the wind. For a while, the silence between them was not heavy, but the peace did not last. Far across the desert, faint lights appeared. Small at first, then growing brighter. Lyra's heart sank as she recognized them. They were torches. Not wildfire, organized, steady. Her people were searching, her body tensed. Panic filled her chest. If the hunters found her with a human, they would not only drag her back, they would kill him too. She glanced at Kyle. He followed her gaze, then narrowed his eyes at the distant lights. His hand moved to the strange object he carried, the same one that had made thunder and fire earlier. He stood tall, scanning the horizon like a warrior preparing for battle. Lyra grabbed his sleeve, shaking her head. Her voice broke as she whispered, "No, they will kill you." Of course, he could not understand her words, but he looked into her eyes and something passed between them, fear, warning, and trust. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder as if to say, "I am not afraid." The lights grew closer. Voices carried on the wind, harsh and angry. Lyra could almost hear the words her people would spit when they saw her. Curse, outcast, weak. Her breath came quick and shallow. She wanted to run, to disappear into the dunes, but her body was too weak. Kale bent down and lifted his pack. He stamped the torch into the sand, leaving only the stars and the faint glow of the fire. Then he extended a hand toward her. For a moment, Lyra stared at it. Her people's teachings screamed in her mind. Humans are dangerous. Do not touch them. But another voice whispered too. Her mother's voice. Sometimes hope wears a different face than you expect. With trembling fingers, she reached out and placed her small hand in his. His grip was firm, steady, and warm. Without a word, Kale pulled her close and led her into the darkness away from the coming lights. The desert stretched ahead, endless and unknown. Behind them, her people searched with fire and fury. Lyra's heart raced as she followed the human stranger. Fear and doubt battled inside her. But one truth burned brighter than all others. She was not alone anymore. A fragile bond. The desert night wrapped around them like a cold blanket. Kale's footsteps were steady on the sand, but Lyra's were small and uneven. Her thin legs struggled to keep up, yet he did not let go of her hand. Every few steps he slowed just enough so she would not fall behind. The torches of the hunters burned faintly in the distance now, far but not gone. Lyra's heart still raced at the thought of them. Her people's voices seemed to echo in her head. Cursed child, weak, dangerous to all. The words clung to her like shadows, but when she glanced at the human Kyle, the echo grew quieter. They stopped when Kyle found a narrow ridge of rocks, tall enough to hide them. He guided her behind the stones and set down his pack. The night was sharp with silence. Only the whisper of the wind passed over the sand. Lyra sank onto the ground, hugging her knees. Her body shook, not only from cold but from the fear that still gnawed inside her. Kale crouched nearby, pulling out a small device. With a twist, it lit up softly, glowing like a tiny sun. He placed it between them, casting a gentle circle of light. For a while, neither spoke. The little alien girl did not know what to say. Kale did not expect her to. Instead, he opened his pack again. This time, he took out a piece of cloth and a small jar of salve. He motioned toward her scraped knees and bruised arms. Lyra stiffened. Her people had always told her, humans will hurt you if you let them close. But Kale's eyes were not cruel. They carried patience, a quiet strength. Slowly, he dipped his fingers into the salve and touched it to her arm. The cool medicine spread across her skin, easing the sting. Lyra gasped softly, not from pain but from surprise. Kale gave a faint smile. He worked carefully, wrapping the cloth around her knee. His hands were rough from travel, but his touch was gentle. When he finished, he pulled back and nodded as if saying, "There. Better now." Lyra studied him, her mind full of questions she could not ask. Why would a human help her? What did he want in return? Her stomach growled before she could think further. Kale's head tilted at the sound. He pulled out more dried fruit and bread, offering it to her. This time she did not wait as long. Hunger won the fight against fear. She ate slowly, watching him the whole time. Kyle did not take any food for himself. He simply sat, eyes scanning the horizon, ears alert for danger. "Why?" she whispered at last, though she knew he could not understand. "Why help me?" He looked at her when she spoke, his brow furrowing slightly as if trying to catch the meaning. Then he shook his head, smiling softly, and tapped his chest. "Kale," he said again, firmly this time. She nodded faintly. "Lyra." Her name sounded strange in the night, but hearing it aloud gave her strength. He repeated it just like before. Lyra. The way he said it, she no longer felt like a curse. She felt like someone who mattered. The bond between them was fragile, as thin as a thread of spider silk. But it was there. The wind picked up, carrying a sharp howl from the dunes. Lyra shivered, pulling the blanket closer. Kyle noticed. Without a word, he shifted closer and draped part of his heavy cloak around her. It smelled of dust, smoke, and something else, something safe. Her eyes grew heavy. Exhaustion pressed down on her small body, but fear kept her awake. What if the hunters found them while she slept? What if the beasts returned? As if sensing her worry, Kale picked up his strange weapon, the one that made thunder. He set it across his lap and leaned against the rocks. He was telling her without words, "Sleep, I will watch." Her chest tightened. No one had ever protected her like this since her mother's death. The elders had only spat curses. The others had only looked away. But this human, someone her people called dangerous, was guarding her life. Slowly, her eyelids closed. She let herself rest for the first time in days. The last thing she saw was the steady fire of Kale's eyes, glowing in the faint light as he kept watch. Hours passed. The desert night crawled toward dawn. Kale stayed awake, scanning every sound, every shadow. He did not move when the girl shifted in her sleep, nor when the cold bit deeper. His gaze stayed on the horizon, where faint torchlight still flickered in the distance. At last the sky began to pale. Lyra stirred, her small body stiff from the ground. She opened her eyes, blinking at the first light of morning. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she saw Kale, still awake, still watching. She sat up slowly. A question burned inside her. Why doesn't he leave me? Kale noticed her gaze. He gave a short nod, like a promise. Then he stood and offered his hand again. Lyra hesitated only a moment this time before she placed her hand in his. The desert stretched out before them, vast and dangerous. Behind them, her people still hunted. But for the first time, she did not feel like a lost child wandering toward death. She felt like she was walking toward something new. And though their bond was fragile, it was growing stronger with every step. The chase. The sun rose slowly over the desert, turning the sky from black to gold. Heat replaced the night's bitter cold, and the red sand shimmered as though it burned. Lyra walked beside Kale. Her small steps hurried to match his long stride. She clutched the blanket close, but it did little against the new heat. Behind them, faint smoke rose into the sky. It came from the torches of her people. They had not stopped searching. Kale saw it too. His jaw tightened. He shifted the strap of his pack and glanced down at Lyra. She looked back at him, fear plain in her eyes. No words were needed. Both knew the hunters were closer. They kept moving. The desert was cruel, but Kale moved as if he knew its ways. He avoided open ground, staying near the rocks and ridges. He stopped often to listen, kneeling low, his hand always near the weapon at his side. Lyra followed his example, her ears sharp for voices or the pounding of feet. At midday, they reached a canyon. Its walls rose high on either side, carved by winds long ago. Kale led her inside. Shadows stretched cool over the sand, but the air was heavy, full of silence. Lyra's chest tightened. She remembered the old stories of the canyon, tales her mother once whispered. People who entered sometimes never returned. The rocks hid beasts and the wind carried voices that were not human. She tugged on Kale's sleeve, shaking her head. Bad place, she whispered, though she knew he could not understand. Kale glanced down at her, then back at the open desert behind them. Smoke still rose. The hunters were not far. He gave her shoulder a gentle push forward. His eyes said what his mouth could not. It's dangerous, yes, but safer than staying here. So they entered. The canyon walls loomed above them like giant teeth. Strange symbols were carved into the stone, old broken lines that no one had touched for ages. Lyra brushed her fingers against one, and a chill ran through her. Kale noticed but said nothing. He pressed forward, careful with each step. Then it came, the sound of voices, faint at first, carried by the canyon wind. Lyra froze. Her people. Kale heard them too. He grabbed her hand and pulled her deeper. The path twisted, splitting into two. Kale chose quickly, turning left. Shouts echoed now, closer. Boots clattered against stone. The hunters were inside the canyon. Lyra's breath came fast. Panic clawed at her chest. If they caught her, she knew what would happen. She would be dragged back in chains, beaten for running. And Kale? They would kill him without mercy. Kale squeezed her hand tighter, urging her to run. They moved quickly over the rocky floor, weaving through narrow paths. The canyon walls closed in, tighter and tighter, but the hunters were clever. They spread out, their voices bouncing off the stone. Torches flared at the far end, cutting off one escape. Kale stopped, his eyes scanning the walls. Then he spotted it, a narrow opening between two boulders. Without hesitation, he pushed Lyra toward it. Go, he whispered, though she could barely understand. His tone carried no doubt. Lyra slid inside, the stone scraping her arms. She crawled through, the passage tight and dark. Behind her, Kale followed, his shoulders barely fitting. The space opened suddenly into a hidden cave. Cool air rushed around them, carrying the scent of dust and something ancient. Symbols glowed faintly on the walls, brighter than the ones outside. Lyra gasped. The marks pulsed with soft light as if alive. She touched one and warmth spread through her fingers. Kale's eyes narrowed. He raised the torch he carried, studying the symbols. His face grew still, almost reverent. Lyra whispered, "Old ones." Her mother had once spoken of them, the first beings who shaped the land long before tribes or humans walked the stars. The cave was sacred. Few had ever seen it. But before wonder could take root, a shout rang out. Hunters. They had followed the tracks. Cale's face hardened. He pushed Lyra behind him and raised his weapon. His body was tense, ready. The first hunter appeared at the cave's mouth, torchlight spilling in. His eyes widened at the sight of the human and the girl. There, he shouted. Others rushed forward. Torches lit the walls, their fire making the symbols blaze even brighter. The cave shook faintly, as if the earth itself woke from sleep. Kyle fired once. Thunder cracked, echoing through the cave. The hunter dropped, his torch rolling across the ground. Others ducked back in shock, but more voices shouted from outside. Lyra's heart pounded. She pressed her back to the glowing wall, fear and awe mixing inside her. The cave itself seemed alive, humming louder with every shout, every shot of Cale's weapon. He turned to her for a brief moment, his eyes sharp. He said nothing, but his look was clear. Stay behind me. Do not run. Lyra nodded, though terror trembled in her chest. The hunters charged again, their blades gleaming, their faces twisted with rage. Cale stood firm, firing once more. The blast roared, shaking stone dust from the ceiling. The cave's glow pulsed brighter, the symbols spreading light across the walls like fire. A low rumble echoed deep within, a sound that was not human. Lyra's eyes widened. She whispered almost to herself, "Something is waking." The hunters paused, hearing it too. Fear flickered across their faces, but Cale did not move. His stance was steady, his weapon raised, his shadow cast large against the glowing wall. The bond between him and the little alien girl had led them here, into a place where danger and destiny waited together. The chase was not over. It had only brought them to the heart of something greater, the secret of the cave. The cave trembled like a living thing. Dust fell from the ceiling in thin clouds, and the glowing symbols along the walls pulsed brighter, as if the stone itself carried a heartbeat. Lyra pressed herself against the wall, her eyes wide with fear and wonder. Cale stood firm near the cave's entrance, weapon raised. The hunters hesitated now. They had chased an outcast girl and a human, but what they found was something older, something sacred. One hunter sneered, forcing his fear away. "The cursed child hides in the old place," he spat. "End her, now!" They surged forward again. Cale fired, the thunder echoing like a storm trapped inside stone. The blast struck the ground, sending sparks of rock into the air. The hunters stumbled back, their torches shaking in their hands. But the gunfire did more than scare them. It awakened something deeper. The glowing symbols stretched across the walls like veins, connecting to the floor beneath them. Light spread, tracing lines toward the center of the cave. A circular platform began to rise slowly, stone grinding against stone. Lyra's breath caught. Her mother had once whispered of such places, hidden chambers left by the old ones. Only those marked by fate could enter them. Kyle turned his head, eyes narrowing at the platform. His weapon lowered slightly, his gaze sharp but curious. He motioned for Lyra to come closer. Fear made her hesitate, but the warmth of the light drew her forward step by step until she stood upon the platform. The moment her bare feet touched the stone, the cave roared with sound. The hunters froze. The light surged upward, filling the cavern with a brilliant glow. Strange patterns danced across the walls, forming images. A great starship carved from light, beings tall and radiant. A war that consumed worlds. And finally a child with glowing eyes standing between two armies. The hunters whispered among themselves. "A prophecy," one muttered. Lyra's heart pounded. The figure in the vision, it was small, fragile, yet powerful. Could it be her? The cave itself seemed to answer. A voice rose, not spoken aloud, but echoing directly into her mind. Born of loss, chosen of two worlds. "The time is near," Lyra gasped, clutching her chest. She looked at Cale, but he only watched her, silent, as if he knew the message was not for him. The hunters, however, were not silent. Their leader snarled, raising his blade. "Lies, she is no savior, only a curse. Kill her before the mark is complete." They charged again. Cale moved fast, stepping between them and Lyra. His weapon roared, fire and thunder filling the air. One hunter fell, another dropped his torch. The rest wavered, fear breaking their rage. But then the cave itself joined the fight. The glowing symbols blazed, and the ground shook so hard the hunters stumbled. From the walls, stone shapes slid free, statues tall and armored, their eyes burning with the same light. The hunters froze, terror on their faces. The statues moved. Slowly at first, then with heavy steps they walked toward the intruders. Their stone hands held spears of pure light. "No," one hunter whispered, his voice trembling. "Guardians," the statues raised their spears. In one swift motion, beams of light shot forward, striking the ground before the hunters' feet. The message was clear: leave or be destroyed. Panic spread. The hunters dropped their weapons and fled, their torches vanishing into the canyon night. Their shouts echoed as they ran, curses and fear mixing together. The cave grew still again, the rumbling fading. The guardians returned to their places along the wall, becoming statues once more. Only their glowing eyes remained, watching. Lyra stood on the platform, trembling. She looked at Kyle, her voice shaking. They called me Curse. But the cave... She swallowed hard. "The cave calls me Chosen." Kale lowered his weapon, his sharp eyes softening. He stepped onto the platform beside her. For a moment, he simply looked at the glowing marks on her hands, marks that had not been there before. Strange lines of light traced across her skin, curling like fire. He touched his chest lightly, then pointed to her, then to the stars carved on the wall. His meaning was clear even without words. "You matter. More than they know." Lyra's throat tightened. For so long she had been nothing but unwanted, hated, cast aside. Now this human she barely knew was telling her the opposite. Her voice was a whisper, but strong. "Then I will not run anymore." The cave seemed to hum in agreement. Kyle gave a small nod, then turned his eyes toward the entrance. The hunters were gone, but they would return, and next time, they would not come alone. He tightened the strap on his pack, slung the weapon across his shoulder, and offered his hand again. Lyra looked down at the glowing marks on her hands, then back at him. She placed her small fingers into his. Together they stepped off the platform. The light dimmed, but it did not vanish. It stayed faint on her skin like a reminder. As they left the cave, the wind carried the last whisper of the old ones. Two worlds will clash. One child will decide their fate. Lyra shivered, but not from fear. From the weight of destiny. Kale walked beside her, silent but steady. As the first stars of evening rose above the desert sky, the fight for survival. The desert night returned heavy and cold as Kyle and Lyra left the glowing cave behind. The marks on her hands still burned faintly, casting a soft light with every step. She stared at them, half in fear and half in wonder. Kale walked in silence, but his eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. He knew the hunters would return. They had seen too much, and they would not allow the prophecy to live. By dawn, they reached a line of jagged rocks. Kyle stopped there, lifting his hand for silence. Lyra froze, her heart thudding. Then she heard it too, voices carried by the wind. The hunters were back, and this time they were many. Dozens of torches moved across the desert, spreading wide, cutting off escape. Shadows shifted as warriors armed with spears and blades closed in. Their leader's voice rang out, sharp and hateful. "Bring us the child. The curse ends today." Lyra's knees shook. Fear poured through her, but Kale stepped in front of her, weapon ready. He looked back only once, his eyes meeting hers. There was no fear in him, only calm strength. The first wave of hunters rushed forward. Kale's gun roared, each blast like thunder tearing through the air. Sand exploded where the shots struck, throwing enemies backward. But there were too many. For every one that fell, two more appeared, shouting, their blades catching the morning light. Lyra pressed against the rocks, trembling. Her breath came fast, her chest tight. She wanted to hide, to vanish into the sand. But then her hands burned hotter, the marks glowing bright. The memory of the cave's voice filled her mind. Born of loss, chosen of two worlds, the ground shook faintly under her feet. Her eyes widened as she lifted her hands. Light streamed from her palms, faint at first, then growing stronger. Kale glanced back, his eyes widening for a moment. But he did not flinch. He only shifted his stance, giving her space. The hunters noticed too. They hesitated, fear flashing across their faces. "The curse!" one shouted. "She awakens." Light burst outward. It was not fire, not heat, something different, something older. The air shimmered as a wave of force exploded from Lyra's hands. The nearest hunters were thrown backward, their torches scattering like falling stars. Silence fell for a breath. Then the hunters screamed, rushing again. Kale fought with precision, his weapon striking true, his movements sharp and controlled. He moved like a man who had faced death many times before. Lyra stood beside him, light pulsing through her small body. Fear still filled her heart, but each time she lifted her hands, power answered. She pushed forward, and the sand itself rose like a shield. She cried out, and the ground trembled beneath the hunter's feet. Still, the fight was not easy. For every moment of strength, exhaustion followed. Her small body shook under the weight of the power, and her vision blurred. Kale saw it, and he stepped closer, covering her with his fire when she stumbled. One hunter broke through, his blade raised high. He charged straight at Lyra. Kale shouted, but he was too far. Lyra's eyes burned. Her hands rose on instinct, and light surged again, blinding, fierce. The hunter froze mid-strike, his weapon shattering into dust. The force flung him across the rocks where he lay unmoving. Lyra collapsed to her knees, her chest heaving. The glow in her hands dimmed, flickering like a dying flame. Kale pulled her up quickly, steadying her with one arm. He fired again, forcing the hunters to retreat a step. His eyes met hers, sharp and urgent. He did not need words for her to understand. You are not weak. You are the key. The hunters regrouped. Their leader's voice thundered, full of rage. She is no savior. She is death. Kill them both. They charged once more. Kale braced, but Lyra lifted her head. Tears streaked her dusty face, but her eyes glowed bright, brighter than before. She thought of her mother, her gentle voice, her warm smile. She thought of the elders' cruel words, the night she was cast out. She thought of Kale, who had given her water, food, and hope when no one else would. Her fear cracked open, and courage spilled out. She rose to her feet, raising both hands high. Light erupted, flooding the canyon like sunrise. The ground split, rocks shattering as energy roared outward. The hunters screamed, their torches extinguished, their weapons breaking in their hands. One by one they fled. Fear drove them faster than blades or bullets. Their leader stumbled, shouting curses before vanishing into the dunes with the rest. Silence fell. Only the sound of the wind remained. Lyra swayed, exhaustion washing over her. Kale caught her before she could fall. He lowered her gently to the sand, his face unreadable but his grip steady. The glow on her hands faded, leaving only faint lines like scars of light. I did that, she whispered weakly, her eyes wide with disbelief. Kale crouched beside her. He touched his chest, then hers, then pointed at the horizon where the hunters had vanished. His meaning was clear. Yes, you did this. And they will not forget. Lyra closed her eyes, her breathing slow but steady. For the first time, she did not feel cursed. She felt powerful. But deep inside, she also knew something darker. Her people would never stop hunting her now. Not because she was weak, but because she was strong. Kale lifted her into his arms, carrying her across the sand as the sun climbed higher. The battle was over, but the war for her future had only just begun. The choice of two worlds. The desert stretched endless and silent after the battle. Broken weapons and dark stains marked the sand where the hunters had fallen. The sun glared overhead, but the world felt strangely still, as if holding its breath. Kale carried Lyra across the dunes until they reached a cluster of stone pillars rising from the ground like the bones of a giant. He set her down gently in the shade. Her hands still glowed faintly, the strange marks burning soft against her skin. For a while they rested. Lyra's breaths were shallow, but strength slowly returned to her small body. Kale offered her water, and she drank carefully. His sharp eyes stayed on the horizon, watchful for the hunters who might return. Then the ground trembled. Not like the soft shakes of the cave, but deeper, stronger, as if something vast moved beneath the earth. The stone pillars hummed, glowing faintly just as the cave had. Lyra pushed herself up, her eyes wide. "The old ones," she whispered, though Kale could not understand. She felt it. Something ancient had been waiting here, waiting for her. The pillars cracked open, and from their center rose a massive structure. It was not stone, not metal, but something in between. Its surface shimmered with strange lights, shifting like water. At its core, a single eye-shaped crystal opened, glowing bright as a star. A voice thundered in their minds, strong and clear. "Child of loss, human of war, you stand where two worlds meet." Lyra flinched, clutching her head. The voice was everywhere, inside her mind, around her body, filling the very air. Kyle gripped his weapon, eyes narrowing at the structure. But the glow softened as it turned to Lyra. "The blood of your people rejects you. The hand of the stranger saves you. You carry both paths. Now you must choose." The crystal flickered and visions filled the air. On one side, Lyra saw her people. Proud, strong, yet cruel. Their voices screamed curse, exile, shame. She saw them destroy villages, hunt the weak, cling to fear. On the other side, she saw humans, fierce, desperate, always fighting to survive. She saw Kale's world, ruins of cities, endless wars, lives taken too quickly. Both sides were flawed. Both sides were broken. The voice spoke again. You hold the power to unite, or to destroy. Will you lead with hate, or with hope? Lyra trembled. She was only a child. She had been cast out, abandoned, nearly left to die. Why should she choose hope for people who had never shown her love? Why should she forgive? Her hands glowed brighter, reacting to her emotions. The light burned hot, wild, as if waiting for her decision. Kale stepped forward, his face set with quiet strength. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. He did not speak, but his eyes said everything. He had fought for her, protected her without asking for anything in return. Hope did not come from her people. Hope came from him. Tears filled her eyes. She lifted her glowing hands toward the crystal. Her voice was shaky but firm. I choose hope. For a moment, silence. Then the crystal pulsed, flooding the desert with light. The ground shook, the pillars humming louder. The visions shifted, no longer war and death, but unity. She saw humans and aliens standing together, building, sharing. She saw herself older, leading both sides not as curse but as bridge. The voice echoed softer now, almost like a whisper. Then so it shall be. Remember, hope is heavy to carry, but it will not break you. The crystal dimmed, the great structure sinking back into the earth. The pillars cracked closed, leaving only silence behind. Lyra collapsed to her knees, exhausted but alive. The marks on her hands faded to faint scars of light, permanent reminders of what she had chosen. Kale knelt beside her, steadying her with one arm. He studied her face, then pointed to the horizon where her people once ruled, and then to the stars above. Finally, he touched his chest, then hers. His meaning was clear. Your choice matters, not just for you, for everyone. Lyra swallowed hard. The fear inside her had not vanished, but something stronger filled its place. Courage. For the first time, she did not see herself as cursed. She saw herself as chosen. She looked up at Kale. Her voice was quiet but steady. This is only the beginning. He gave a small nod, his lips curving in the faintest smile. Together they stood. The desert stretched wide before them, filled with danger, filled with enemies, but also filled with the possibility of something new. The little alien girl who had once been banished now carried the fate of two worlds in her hands. And beside her, the human who had appeared in her darkest night walked forward without fear. The world would not be the same again.